Have you ever stopped to wonder why so many people accept certain ideas without ever giving themselves the right to question them? Why do so many repeat convictions as if they were eternal truths, even without ever examining them closely? What makes someone give up their own curiosity in exchange for ready-made answers? What you are about to discover in this story is that there is an ancient mechanism, repeated throughout the centuries, capable of shaping thoughts and domesticating consciousnesses. And the most disturbing part is that it works so well that many believe they are choosing, when in fact, they are being led. This process begins with repetition. No matter what tradition or culture you observe, the formula is almost always the same. Words, prayers, chants, phrases spoken, in unison, daily. Gradually, the mind stops asking if it's real and begins to accept it as natural. The brain associates familiarity with truth. What is repeated many times, even without proof, starts to sound comforting. It's not a coincidence, it's conditioning. Another essential point is childhood. Ideas introduced early take deep roots. Children are not taught to analyze. They are taught to memorize, to obey, to repeat. In many traditions, the process is not one of education, but of inculcation. And when you grow up with something installed before you even learn to reason, it becomes confused with your own identity. And when doubt appears, it is treated as a flaw. Questioning is not seen as a sign of intelligence, but as a sign of weakness. In some places, we can't identify with what we're doing. In some places, the punishment is explicit: public shame, fear, exclusion. In others, the punishment is silent: looks, isolation, guilt. In either case, the result is the same: learning to suppress one's own unease so as not to lose belonging. But perhaps the most powerful aspect is the emotional bond. It's not just about accepting a belief. It's about being connected to it through family, community, the most intimate relationships. Rejecting the idea, therefore, is not just disagreeing with a concept. It is breaking with loved ones. It is bearing the burden of disappointing those you respect most. And then the question looms like a shadow: to what extent do we believe because we want to? And to what extent do we believe because we cannot bear the loss? There is yet another mechanism that amplifies this control: the creation of closed systems. In this model, all answers must come from within. Any external knowledge is seen as a threat. Philosophy, science, psychology, none of this can be admitted, because opening space for the outside would risk the entire structure. Thus, the mind is isolated like an island, convinced that it already possesses everything it needs. Fear is another resource used shamelessly. Fear of punishment, fear of death, fear of a dark destiny. The logic is simple: you are not only invited to believe, but you are warned about what will happen if you don't. The images of eternal suffering, divine punishment, or painful rebirths are not metaphors for those who grow up under this narrative. They are real threats, constantly reinforced. Fear becomes the invisible glue that keeps obedience intact. But where fear does not appear, the promise of reward takes over. Eternal happiness, endless peace, definitive salvation. Distant rewards, always conditioned on obedience in the present. Paradise is never now. Now is always duty, discipline, surrender. This is the trick of delayed gratification. Living life is a constant waiting, with no chance to verify if the prize actually exists. The most decisive sector is the division between us and them. Inside you belong, outside you are lost. This binary vision eliminates nuances and creates almost insurmountable emotional barriers. Questioning the group means risking your own identity. It's not just an exchange of beliefs, it's losing the ground you stand on. Few are willing to face that void. And this is where I want to hear from you. Since we are talking about conditionings that cross generations, tell me in the comments here: doubt is a sign of courage. Write this phrase and share what it awakens in you. Another effective resource to sustain this system is the manipulation of language. Common words gain new meanings within the closed circle. Terms like truth, faith, sin, or miracle begin to carry a unique weight, different from that used in everyday life. This semantic reconfiguration changes the way one thinks. When questioning starts to be called rebellion and curiosity is translated as pride, the mind begins to self-censor. The vocabulary becomes an invisible prison. History is also shaped to reinforce the narrative. Characters are idealized. Facts are embellished. Miracles are presented as real events. And because these accounts are repeated countless times, they end up being accepted as if they were historical records. But this is not history. It is carefully constructed propaganda to legitimize the authority of a tradition. Another common strategy is to attack the individual's self-esteem. You are constantly reminded that you are flawed, sinful, small. Without this system, they say, you are nothing. This feeling of insufficiency creates dependency. With every reminder that you are unworthy, the need arises to seek approval within the very structure that installed the wound. It's a calculated cycle. Destroy self-confidence and offer the cure in the same place. Guilt completes the scenario. It's not enough to act according to the rules. Even thoughts and desires begin to be policed. The simple act of feeling or imagining something outside the allowed scope already becomes a cause for internal burden. The person feels guilty not only for what they do, but for what they are. This constant shame opens space for forgiveness, offered in a controlled manner, to become a product sought repeatedly. And in the midst of all this, rituals emerge. Lighting candles, repeating prayers, singing hymns are seemingly simple acts, yet profoundly effective. The more the body participates in repetitive gestures, the more the mind associates belonging and conviction. Even when belief begins to waver, habits have enough strength to maintain the connection. It's as if the practice becomes the anchor that prevents the definitive exit. Obedience is elevated to the level of maximum virtue. Critical intelligence, creativity, or doubt are not valued, but rather submission. Following without questioning is praised as proof of purity. Accepting without evidence is seen as a sign of true faith. This is not an ideal of virtue, it is a system of control disguised as devotion. To sustain this obedience, collectivity is reinforced. Weekly meetings, mass gatherings, public celebrations. The implicit message is clear. Being alone is risky, because dangerous thoughts arise in solitude. Constant contact with the group does not just serve to socialize. It is a way to suppress any flicker of individual reflection. Art, music, and aesthetics are also silent weapons. Emotional songs, intense images, grand architecture. These elements do not pass through the filter of reason. They directly hit the emotion. And when emotion dominates, critical thinking is silenced. The sensory impact is so profound that people often mistake for a spiritual experience what is, in fact, merely. Another delicate point is the attempt to monopolize morality. The repeated message is that, without this system, there would be no right or wrong. That abandoning the belief is the same as abandoning values. This idea traps people, not out of love for truth, but out of fear of their own freedom. After all, if you cannot trust yourself, the only way out is to depend on external rules. And here arises a question that might bother you. Have you ever confused intense emotion with absolute truth? Reflect on this, because soon we will explore the extent to which these sensations can be used to shape the way you see yourself and the world. When life brings pain, losses, or failures, the system finds an even more fertile ground to strengthen itself. In these moments of vulnerability, it presents itself as a haven, as an answer, as a supportive community. But this help rarely comes without conditions. To receive comfort, you need to accept the beliefs. To be welcomed, you must conform to the rules. Acceptance becomes a trade-off, and personal suffering turns into the perfect opportunity to reinforce loyalty. Silence is also used as a strategic tool. Contradictions in the stories. We don't talk about that. Scandals or failures of leaders. Ignored. Questions that have no answers. Simply not mentioned. This silence is not neutral, it is calculated. What is not said cannot be questioned. And what is not questioned takes on airs of the sacred. This is how the image of perfection is preserved. Another factor that strengthens the mechanism is the link between identity and belief. It is not just about ideas you can adopt or abandon. It is about who you are. The feeling grows that disagreeing with the belief is equivalent to betraying your own essence. Loyalty, therefore, is not merely intellectual, but emotional and existential. This transforms the act of questioning into something terrifying, almost like an attack on one's very life. Complexity is also used as a shield. Theological systems are dense, contradictory, difficult to comprehend. But instead of encouraging analysis, the message is, do not try to understand, just trust. The lack of logic becomes a resource of authority. The more incomprehensible, the more divine it seems. This planned confusion disarms reason and favors blind acceptance. And there is also the notion of scarcity. Only here is the truth. Only here will you find salvation. This idea creates a fear of leaving, a fear of never finding answers again, a fear of being forever lost if you dare to abandon the group. It's a powerful strategy because it makes the person believe that outside that space, there is no solid ground. Another point that reinforces this dominance is the control over life's milestones. Birth, rites of passage, marriage, death, all surrounded by religious ceremonies, symbols, and rituals. Each important phase is enveloped by practices that reinforce dependency on the system. Thus, the person's own life story becomes confused with the story of the belief. And when everything that is most important is linked to it, leaving the belief feels like erasing one's own biography. Free thinking is also limited. Even curiosity is directed down a single path. You can question, provided the final answer confirms what has already been established. It is a false openness, a labyrinth with only one exit. This creates the illusion of freedom. But in the end, all roads lead to the same point. Another tool for isolation is the way insiders and outsiders are labeled. Believer and non-believer, saved and lost, pure and impure. This vocabulary does not just define roles, it shapes relationships. The dissenter is not just different, they are someone morally inferior. This division not only prevents dialogue but fuels the idea that the external world is dangerous, hostile, and untrustworthy. And to top it off, passivity is presented as a virtue. The message is clear: do not fight for justice, do not confront abuse, do not question inequalities. Wait, because justice will come from above, and your suffering is part of a greater plan. This view does not make people more peaceful, only more compliant. And compliance serves those who wish to maintain power, not those who suffer injustice. Now stop and think. How many times has the discourse that suffering brings meaning been used to prevent someone from reacting? This is the key we will explore further, because understanding this detail changes the way we see the relationship between pain, submission, and power. Political power often mixes with religious power in an almost inseparable way. Kings, leaders, and governors throughout history have used the sacred aura to legitimize their decisions. Questioning the ruler was not just questioning a man, but challenging the divinity itself. This strategic use transformed beliefs into a shield against criticism and a justification for wars, persecutions, and discrimination. Another clever resource is to reclassify doubt as proof of faith. When someone starts to question, they are told it is just a test that needs to be overcome. Instead of seeing the questioning as a sign of inconsistency, it is transformed into a spiritual challenge. This inversion is ingenious. What could be the exit door becomes another reason to stay. There is also the idea that belief is a free choice. But in practice, it rarely is. Most are born into an environment already marked by a tradition. From an early age, the child is immersed in a system that shapes their thinking with little room for alternatives. The supposed act of choosing is nothing more than the result of conditioning. Calling this freedom is, at the very least, illusory. Even when someone decides to step away, the residues remain. Guilt, fear, shame, self-censorship. These feelings do not disappear with the abandonment of belief. They become internal scars, habits of thought that can last for years. The control does not end when the faith ends. It only ceases when the imposed mental patterns are consciously deconstructed. And here arises a question that may intrigue you. If the true control is not only in the external practices, but also in the mental structures that remain even after leaving, is it possible to be truly free without first acknowledging these invisible scars? Another effective mechanism is the convenient selection of passages and ideas. The harsher and more violent aspects are left aside, while the sweeter and more inspiring ones are exalted. This clipping does not eliminate the contradictions, it merely masks the system. And when someone points out the uncomfortable excerpts, the reaction is to look away, as if ignoring them is enough to erase them. Many traditions also encourage isolation from the outside world. The discourse is about spiritual purity, but the real function is to avoid contact with other viewpoints. If you never hear different ideas, you will never have the tools to compare. And without contrast, even a mistake seems absolute. Protection against external influences is, in fact, protection against doubt. Suffering, in this context, is reinterpreted as virtue. If you are in pain, it is because you are being purified, tested, or corrected. This view prevents the search for real causes of pain, such as inequality, exploitation, or abuse. The fault always falls on the individual, who must endure and adjust, instead of fighting for concrete transformation. Suffering does not become something to be confronted, but something to be venerated. Another point is the false certainty offered for the mysteries of existence. What happens after death? Where did the universe come from? What is consciousness? Complex questions that still lack definitive answers are packaged in ready-made solutions that present themselves as absolute. This practice does not seek to clarify, but to satisfy the human need for security, even with fragile answers. And I want you to participate now. Write the phrase "courage is to doubt" in the comments. It is a way to reinforce in yourself the importance of doubt as a tool for growth. And also to show that you are not alone in this process of reflection. Another important detail is how the notion of sin is used to maintain constant vigilance over the mind. It's not just about harmful facts. Even thoughts, desires, and natural feelings are classified as flaws. This installs an internal policing mechanism. You begin to watch yourself, punishing yourself even before any external authority needs to intervene. It is the perfect control because it becomes automatic. The idea of fulfilled prophecies is also used. Ancient texts are reinterpreted to fit discoveries, as if they were predicting scientific or historical events. But this is not real prediction, but rather posterior adaptation. This resource makes it seem like the system has always been right, even if, in practice, the readings are molded according to the context. Even charity can be transformed into a recruitment tool. Help is offered, but often accompanied by demands. Attending meetings, accepting texts, participating in groups. It is not free assistance. It is conditional. Goodness becomes a currency of exchange. And loyalty is bought under the guise of compassion. Perhaps the most dangerous aspect, however, is the total inversion of meaning. Obedience presented as freedom, submission sold as peace, silence exalted as wisdom. When a person believes this, they begin to defend the very system that imprisons them. And at this point, the chain becomes invisible, but even more resistant. And here is a provocation. When we defend certain convictions tooth and nail, are we not just protecting the prison they taught us to love? This defense mechanism reaches such a point that many believe they are choosing of their own free will, when in fact, they are only repeating what they were taught from an early age. Belief becomes confused with identity. And any external criticism sounds like a personal attack. Thus, the individual intensely protects the system that shaped them, without realizing that this loyalty is not a result of freedom, but of conditioning. What is offered as meaning for life is not an individual path, but a pre-written script. The answers are already written, the explanations are already formatted, the roles are already defined. Instead of constructing meaning for oneself, the person receives a pre-molded narrative and is taught to defend it. This structure seems solid, but it collapses in the face of honest reflection. The notion of perfect sacred texts also plays a crucial role. By declaring them infallible, any possibility of criticism or updating is blocked. When something cannot be questioned, it freezes in time, even if its ideas no longer make sense in a given historical or social context. The prohibition of doubt is what keeps these ideas untouchable. In the end, all these strategies converge to the same objective, not just to control what people believe, but to control the way they think, how they feel, and how they interpret their own existence. The result is a molded perspective, delivered long before the person has a chance to choose for themselves. A perspective that seems natural, but has been carefully programmed. And if you have made it this far, I want to ask you for something simple. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell. This gesture allows more people to access reflections like this, and consider purchasing my ebook Antifragile, link in the QR code. See you in the next video. Onward, warriors.